Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Howitzer and welcome to Hypertime, where we examine what might have been in the superhero movie genre. Today, we're going to talk about Green Arrow. Green Arrow was created at DC Comics in 1941 by Mort Weisinger and George Papp, two guys you've never heard of. Gold and Silver Age Green Arrow isn't really worth mentioning, and it isn't important to the subject matter of today's episode. Although I would like to point out that Green Arrow was among the DC heroes that weren't cancelled after Frederick Wertham's book Seduction of the Innocents came out. But let's skip ahead to the Bronze Age. The year was 1969. Writer Denny O'Neil and artist Neil Adams, who are most famous for revamping Batman after the campy Adam West days, were brought in to revamp Green Arrow with a new costume and a new origin story. In this origin story, Oliver Queen is a billionaire playboy who falls off of his yacht while partying and washes up on a deserted island. On the island, he trains himself to use a bow and arrow so that he can hunt for food. Eventually, he finds his way off the island and returns to his home, Star City, which is basically the DC equivalent of Seattle. He finds that his fortune is gone, although he does find a way to get it back, but I digress, and he finds a new lease on life, wearing a mask and fighting crime with his bow and arrow, calling himself, of course, Green Arrow. Now, like pretty much every comic book character, his origin has been rewritten and changed several times, but the island has been consistent since O'Neill's day. Despite the fact that a lot of his stories from the O'Neill-Adams era on are pretty good, and that he's been handled by some very talented writers, including Judd Winnick, Kevin Smith, Mike Grell, and even thriller novelist Brad Meltzer, Green Arrow isn't exactly a well-known character. Unfortunately, Green Arrow's been kind of a B-lister his entire life. However, a movie was planned, and a script was written by Justin Marks and David S. Goyer. That script was titled Green Arrow: Escape from Supermax. I remember first hearing about this movie in 2008. The premise was that Green Arrow was framed for murder and placed in Supermax Penitentiary for metahumans, along with a lot of villains that he put away. A script was written, and casting rumors were tossed around, including Matt Damon as Green Arrow. But eventually all noise around the movie died. Then the TV show Arrow was announced. I don't think that's a coincidence. For this episode, I actually hunted down and read the entire script for Green Arrow: Escape from Supermax. So I know pretty much everything that was supposed to happen in the movie. And let me tell you, it's awesome. The movie starts with a flashback to Oliver's origin, but it truly begins with Oliver being framed for the murder of a top official of Checkmate, which is the DC equivalent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Before the New 52 relaunch, that is. His identity is compromised, and he's thrown into a maximum security prison run by Amanda Waller called Supermax. The rest of the movie is about Oliver and a few inmates trying to escape, and Oliver trying to clear his name. Supermax Prison is designed to hold normal humans, superpowered humans, and super geniuses. The prisoners are kept controlled by a device called a parallax device. It's a chip that's planted in their arm, and when they get rambunctious or try to use their powers, Amanda Waller sends a shock through them. The film was to be a showcase of mostly C and D-list villains, including Merlin the Dark Archer as the primary antagonist. Also, Blockbuster, Pied Piper, Gemini, Cascade, Icicle, Jinn, Calculator, Iron Cross, Backlash, Heatmonger, and Count Vertigo were all to make appearances. The script also makes mention of the Joker, Riddler, and Lex Luthor, but they don't actually appear on screen. The film reads a lot more like a Prison Break movie with superpowers than it does an actual superhero movie. In fact, Green Arrow is only in costume in the beginning, during a couple flashback sequences, and then during the climax. And that's not to the film's detriment like I initially thought. This would have been a very, very different superhero movie. And probably for the best. But now let's move on to speculative casting, my favorite part of the show. For Green Arrow, I'm gonna have to disagree with the Matt Damon rumors. I just don't really see him doing a superhero movie. Stephen Amell, the guy who currently plays Green Arrow on Arrow, would have been a bit too young circa 2008. And many would recommend Justin Hartley from Smallville to reprise his role as Green Arrow, but to be real honest, I'm not a fan of Hartley. Or Smallville. Go ahead and throw stones at me, I don't care. My pick would have to be Charlie Hunnam from Sons of Anarchy, or maybe even Neil McDonough from Minority Report. Now for Merlin, I'm going to have to stick with John Barrowman, who plays a different but equally awesome version of him on Arrow. Blockbuster would be Batista, hands down. For Icicle, I'd have to go with Michael J. White. Gemini would probably be Christina Hendricks. Pied Piper would be Jeff Bridges or Michael Douglas for me. Amanda Waller is a tough one. I guess it would depend on whether or not they went with pre- or post-New 52 Waller. Either way, Angela Bassett is an awful choice. Now before we wrap, I have one more question to ask and answer. Will this movie ever see the light of day? Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with no on this one. I don't care what David S. Goyer has to say. At most, we'll get an episode of Arrow that uses the story. Heck, we've already seen elements of it in episodes of Arrow, especially in the Season 2 finale, and the episode where Diggle and Oliver go to Russia. If this movie is ever made, I'll be really surprised. That's a real shame, too, because this movie would have been awesome. I mean, it had awesome action, awesome character moments. It would have completely changed DC's way of operating had they released this movie. Heck, we probably would have avoided that crappy Green Lantern movie. Well, that's all for now. Next time we enter the many branching paths of Hypertime to see what might have been, we'll be looking at James Cameron's attempt to bring Spider-Man to the big screen. I'm Ryan Howitzer, and I'll see you next time.